Eli, a 12-year-old homeless boy, has nothing but a thin blanket, a soggy sandwich, and a heart that still believes in kindness. Clara Morgan, a billionaire soon-to-be mother, has everything money can buy, except love, trust, and peace. One stormy night, their worlds collide when Eli rushes to her aid, unknowingly setting off a chain of events that will change both their futures. As they share laughter, struggles, and moments of unexpected warmth, a bond grows stronger than blood. But neither of them could have imagined that a single act of compassion would turn strangers into family forever. Hey family, welcome to True Life Stories. Please subscribe and give this video a like. It truly means the world to us. Don't forget to share it with your friends and loved ones, and turn on post notifications so you never miss a new upload. Thank you so much for the support. Now, sit back, relax, and let's dive into today's story. The rain was falling hard that night. The city streets glistened under the streetlights, and car tires splashed through puddles, sending water flying onto the sidewalks. People hurried past with umbrellas, heads down, too busy to notice anything or anyone. On the cold stone steps of an old building sat a boy named Eli. He was 12 years old, but his small, thin frame made him look younger. His clothes were worn and damp, and the blanket wrapped around his shoulders was too thin to keep out the cold. His dark hair stuck to his forehead from the rain. In his hands, he clutched a small paper bag holding a half-eaten sandwich, his dinner for the night. Eli had been living on the streets for almost a year. His mother had passed away when he was 9. His father, well, Eli didn't like to talk about him. One day, he was just gone, leaving Eli to fend for himself. He'd bounced between shelters and foster homes, but none of them had worked out. Now the streets were his home. But despite all of that, Eli wasn't bitter. He still tried to help where he could. Sometimes, if he had an extra piece of bread, he'd give it to the old man who slept under the bridge. If he found a stray dog shivering in the rain, he'd share his blanket. He didn't have much, but he knew what it felt like to have nothing, and he wouldn't wish that on anyone. That night, under the pouring rain, Eli's life began to change, though he didn't know it yet. Clara Morgan, who was a millionaire, sat in the back seat of her car, staring out at the rain streaking the tinted window. The city looked different when it rained, colder, lonelier. But then again, Clara had been feeling that way for months now. Her driver, Victor, kept glancing at her through the rearview mirror, his brow furrowed with concern. "Ma'am, are you sure you don't want to go straight home?" he asked. Clara gave him a small smile. "I'm fine, Victor. I just needed some air." Fine. That was the word she used when she didn't want anyone asking more questions. She wasn't fine, not even close, but it was easier to pretend. On paper, Clara had everything. She was 32 years old, CEO of Morgan Enterprises, one of the largest luxury brands in the country. Her name appeared in magazines, she attended charity galas, and her signature was worth millions in business deals. Her penthouse apartment had a view of the skyline most people could only dream of, but none of that could fill the emptiness inside her. Her hand drifted to her stomach. She was 7 months pregnant. The tiny kicks she felt should have been a source of joy, and they were, sometimes. But other times, they were reminders of how much her life had changed in a year. A year ago, she'd been married to David, the man she thought she would grow old with. They had talked about starting a family for years, and when she finally became pregnant, she thought it was the happiest moment of her life. Then, 2 months later, he left. No warning, no real explanation, just a short, cold conversation where he said he wasn't ready to be a father and needed to find himself. Clara had watched him pack his bags and walk out the door, taking her trust with him. Since then, she had been alone. Of course, the tabloids had their stories. Rumors about why he left, whispers about her being too controlling, suggestions that maybe the baby wasn't even his. None of it was true, but Clara had learned that in her world, truth didn't matter. Perception did. She leaned her head back against the leather seat, feeling the dull ache in her back that came with pregnancy. She was tired of meetings, tired of pretending to be strong, tired of carrying this life inside her while feeling like her own was falling apart. The car slowed to a stop at a traffic light. Outside, Clara saw people hurrying along the wet sidewalks, their faces hidden under umbrellas. Her eyes lingered on a small figure sitting alone on the steps of a building. A boy? Maybe 12, wrapped in a blanket far too thin for the weather. For a brief second, their eyes met through the glass. Something in his gaze caught her off guard. It wasn't fear, or pity, or even desperation. It was steady, a kind of quiet strength she hadn't seen in a long time. She looked away, almost embarrassed for staring. "Ma'am?" Victor asked, glancing back again. "We're nearly there. Do you need me to help you inside when we arrive?" Clara nodded. "That would be nice, thank you." But when they reached her building, something in her chest tightened. She didn't want to go inside, not yet. The apartment would be silent, as it always was. "Actually," she said softly, "drop me a block away. I'll walk the rest of the way. I need some time to think." Victor hesitated. "It's raining pretty hard." "I'll be fine," she insisted. The car pulled over to the curb. Clara opened the door and stepped out into the rain. The cold drops soaked into her coat almost instantly, but she didn't mind. Sometimes, feeling the rain reminded her she was still alive. She started walking, her hands still resting on her stomach. The streets were slick, and she had to watch her step. Her mind wandered to her unborn child, to the life she had once imagined, to the strange boy on the steps. That night, Eli had found a dry corner under the overhang of a building. The sandwich had come from a kind waitress at a cafe who slipped it to him as she was closing. He had just taken a bite when he noticed movement across the street. A black car had pulled up by the curb. It wasn't like the taxis or small cars Eli usually saw. It was big, shiny, and looked expensive. The kind of car you only saw in magazines or parked outside hotels with doormen. The back door opened, and a woman stepped out. She wore a dark blue coat that was quickly soaking through in the heavy rain. Her hair was styled neatly, but the rain was already flattening it against her head. One of her hands clutched a small leather bag. The other rested on her stomach. She was pregnant. Eli tilted his head, watching her. People in fancy clothes usually walked quickly, as if the world belonged to them. But this woman didn't walk quickly. She looked tired, weak, even. Her face was pale, and her eyes darted around like she was trying to find somewhere safe. And then, it happened. Clara's vision blurred. At first, she thought it was just the rain in her eyes. But no, her head was spinning. Her body felt heavier with each step. No, not now, she thought. But her knees wobbled. Her fingers loosened around her bag, and it fell into a puddle. Her breathing turned shallow. The bag slipped from her hand and landed in a puddle with a soft splash. Her knees buckled. Eli didn't think. He just moved. He dropped his sandwich and ran across the street, ignoring the cold water soaking through his shoes. He reached her just as she was about to fall, catching her arm to keep her upright. Hey, are you okay?" he asked quickly, his voice trembling from both the cold and the sudden rush of fear. The woman blinked at him, her eyes cloudy and unfocused. "Help me," she whispered. Eli could feel her weight shifting, her body giving out. "It's okay," he said, though his voice was barely steady. "Just lean on me. I've got you." But she didn't lean. Instead, her eyes fluttered shut, and she went limp. "Hey, no, don't do that." Eli's voice rose in panic. He looked around wildly. Cars passed by, but no one seemed to notice. A couple with an umbrella glanced in their direction, then hurried on. Eli gritted his teeth. Fine. If no one else was going to help, he would. He crouched and awkwardly shifted her so he could support her weight. She was heavier than he expected, not because she was big, but because he was small. His thin arms strained, but he tightened his grip. "Hang on," he muttered, as if she could hear him. "Just hang on." A voice called from down the street. "Is she okay?" A man in a delivery jacket jogged toward them. Eli shook his head. "I think she fainted. She needs help." Eli called back. The man pulled out his phone. "I'm calling an ambulance," he said, glancing at the woman. "Kid, you're strong for holding her like that." Eli didn't answer. He just kept his arms around her, trying to keep her steady. Rain dripped down his face, mixing with the warmth of his breath in the cold night air. Minutes later, the sound of sirens grew louder. Red and blue lights painted the wet pavement. Paramedics hurried over, taking the woman from Eli's arms and lifting her onto a stretcher. "Are you family?" one of them asked him. Eli shook his head. "No, I just saw her fall." The paramedic gave him a small nod. "You probably saved her and the baby tonight, kid." Eli stepped back, watching as they loaded her into the ambulance. He wanted to say something, maybe ask if she'd be okay, but the words stuck in his throat. The ambulance doors closed, and the siren wailed again as it drove away. And just like that, the street was quiet again. Eli stood there for a long moment, his thin blanket hanging off his shoulders, his sandwich forgotten on the steps across the street. He didn't know her name. He didn't know if she'd be okay, but something about the way she had looked at him, even for that brief second before she collapsed, made him feel like this wasn't the last time he would see her. The soft beeping of machines was the first thing Clara heard when she opened her eyes. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. The ceiling above her was white, the lights dimmed. The faint smell of disinfectant lingered in the air. She turned her head slightly and saw the rails of a hospital bed. A thin blanket covered her, and her left hand had an 4-tube attached. Her mouth was dry, and her throat felt scratchy. "Mrs. Morgan?" a voice said gently. Clara looked toward the sound. A nurse stood beside her bed, smiling warmly. She looked young, maybe in her 20s, with dark hair pulled back into a neat bun. "You're awake. How are you feeling?" the nurse asked. Clara swallowed, her voice rough, tired, and a little dizzy. "That's normal after fainting," the nurse said. "Your blood pressure was low, but both you and your baby are fine. We've been monitoring you closely." At the mention of her baby, Clara instinctively placed her hand on her stomach. Relief washed over her when she felt a soft kick. "Good," she whispered. The nurse adjusted her blanket. "You were lucky, Mrs. Morgan. A young boy kept you from hitting the ground when you collapsed. He stayed with you until help arrived." Clara's mind flickered back to the last thing she remembered before blacking out. A boy's voice, urgent but steady, telling her he had her, that she'd be okay. What was his name?" she asked. The nurse smiled. "Eli. That's all he told the paramedics. Just Eli." Clara's fingers curled slightly against the blanket. "Do you know where he is?" "I'm afraid not. The ambulance took you here, and he stayed behind. But if you'd like, we can try to find him. I think the delivery driver who called us might know where to start." "Yes," Clara said, her voice firmer this time. "Please, I want to thank him properly." Later that afternoon, Victor arrived at the hospital, looking worried. "Ma'am, you scared me half to death," he said as soon as he stepped inside her room. "I scared myself," Clara admitted. Victor frowned. "The doctors said you should rest more. You've been pushing yourself too hard." She nodded absently. "Victor, do you remember the boy from last night? The one who helped me?" "I didn't see him, ma'am. When I turned back, you were already surrounded by paramedics." Clara sighed. "His name's Eli. I don't know why, but I need to find him." Victor hesitated. "I can ask around. But may I ask why it's so important?" Clara looked out the hospital window at the city skyline, blurred slightly by the glass. "Because no one else stopped," she said softly. "In a street full of people, he was the only one who did, and he had nothing to gain from it." Victor nodded slowly. "All right, I'll see what I can do." The next evening, Victor returned to her hospital room, a small smile tugging at his lips. "I found him." Clara's eyes widened. "You did? He's been staying near that old apartment building on 6th Street. Sits on the steps most nights. I think he's, well, homeless." The word made Clara's chest tighten. "Bring him here, if he's willing." Victor left, and an hour later, the door opened again. He stepped inside, holding the arm of a boy in a damp hoodie. His eyes were cautious but alert. Clara's heart gave a strange tug. Even in the hospital light, she recognized him instantly. "Eli," she said softly. He hesitated by the door. Hi. You okay?" She smiled faintly. "Thanks to you, yes. Please come sit." Victor guided him to the chair beside her bed. Eli sat stiffly, his hands folded in his lap. "I wanted to thank you," Clara began. "You didn't have to help me, but you did. You probably saved me and my baby." Eli shrugged, looking down. "You needed help. That's all." "That's not all," she said gently. "Plenty of people saw me fall. They kept walking, but you stopped. Why?" He glanced up at her, meeting her gaze for the first time. "Because, if it was me lying there, I'd want someone to stop." Something in her chest softened. "You're a good person, Eli." He shrugged again, uncomfortable with the praise. Clara hesitated, then asked, "Do you have somewhere safe to sleep tonight?" Eli's shoulders tensed. "Yeah, kind of." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "And what does kind of mean?" He gave a small, crooked smile. "It means, I've got a dry spot under a building. Better than most." Clara exhaled slowly. "Would you let me help you?" Eli's eyes darted to Victor, then back to her. "Why would you want to?" "Because you helped me when you didn't have to. And because I don't think anyone should have to sleep on the street, especially someone your age." He didn't answer right away. Finally, he said, "I'll think about it." Clara smiled. "That's all I ask." Eli had never been inside a car like this before. The leather seats were so soft he was almost afraid to sit back fully, as if he might break something. The faint smell of new leather mixed with a light, clean scent he couldn't quite name. Outside the tinted windows, the city lights passed in a blur. Victor sat in the driver's seat, glancing at him in the mirror. "You comfortable back there?" Eli shrugged. "Yeah, it's nice." Nice. That was the best word he could think of, though it didn't come close to describing what he was feeling. When they pulled up in front of Clara's building, Eli's mouth went dry. It wasn't just an apartment. It was a tower, the kind of place he'd only ever seen on TV, with a doorman in a neat uniform standing by polished glass doors. Victor got out first and opened the door for him. "Come on, kid." Eli stepped out slowly, feeling the warmth of the building's lights against the cool evening air. The doorman nodded politely to him, though Eli noticed the curious glance that followed. Inside, the lobby was like something from another world. The floors were marble, shining so brightly he could almost see his reflection. A crystal chandelier hung from the high ceiling, scattering light in a way that made the air itself seem to sparkle. "Whoa?" Eli whispered under his breath. Victor smirked. "First time in a place like this?" Eli nodded. "Yeah, you could fit, like, 5 of the shelters I've been in just in here." They took a private elevator all the way to the top floor. When the doors opened, they stepped into a wide hallway with soft carpeting and elegant paintings on the walls. Victor led him to a large double door and knocked once before opening it. Inside, the apartment was enormous. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed the city skyline glittering under the night sky. The furniture looked like it belonged in a design magazine, sleek, modern, but somehow still warm. And there, sitting on a cream-colored sofa, was Clara. She was dressed casually now, in a soft sweater and loose trousers. She smiled when she saw him. "Eli, you came." He nodded, stepping inside slowly. "Yeah, I figured I should see what this was all about." Clara chuckled softly. "It's not a trap, I promise." "I didn't say it was," he said, but his eyes kept darting around the room. A vase that looked like it might cost more than everything he'd ever owned sat on a side table. A painting the size of a door hung on the wall. "Do you want something to eat?" Clara asked. "We have more than soggy sandwiches here." Eli hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, sure." She called to someone in the kitchen, and a few minutes later, a woman appeared with a tray holding a steaming bowl of soup, a grilled cheese sandwich, and a glass of milk. She set it on the coffee table in front of him. Eli sat down carefully, as if the sofa might reject him. He picked up the sandwich and took a cautious bite. His eyes widened. "This is really good," he admitted. "I'm glad," Clara said, watching him with a soft expression. "So, Victor tells me you've been living on the streets for a while." Eli shrugged. "Yeah, it's not fun, but you get used to it." "I don't want you to have to get used to it," she said gently. I'd like to offer you a place to stay. Just for a little while, until you figure out what you want to do. Eli put down his sandwich and looked at her. Why? Clara met his gaze. Because you helped me when no one else did. And because I know what it's like to feel alone. Something in her voice made him believe her. But still, part of him hesitated. Trust didn't come easy anymore. I'm not a charity case, he said quietly. I don't think you are, she replied. I think you're a brave, kind boy who deserves a chance. That's all. Eli looked down at his sandwich, then back at her. I'll stay for tonight. But that's it. For now. Clara smiled. For now is good enough. The guest room Clara gave Eli was bigger than any space he'd ever slept in. The bed had soft white sheets and a thick blanket that felt like it had been made from clouds. There was even a small desk by the window, and when he looked out, the whole city stretched beneath him like a glittering map. For the first few nights, Eli didn't sleep much. He wasn't used to silence. On the streets, there was always some noise, cars, footsteps, voices. Here, it was quiet enough that he could hear the hum of the air conditioning and his own breathing. Clara checked on him every morning. She never pushed him to talk about his past, but she asked how he was feeling, if he needed anything, if he'd slept well. One morning, as they ate breakfast at the long dining table, she said, You know, you don't have to stay in your room all the time. You can explore the apartment. It's your home too, for now. Eli glanced at her over his toast. It's not really my home. Not yet, she agreed. But maybe it can feel like one. At first, Eli stayed cautious. He ate his meals, kept to his room, and avoided getting too comfortable. But as the days passed, he began to notice things about Clara. She worked long hours from her home office, but she always took time to check on him. She laughed more than he expected, sometimes at something on TV, sometimes at one of Victor's dry jokes. And when she was tired, she didn't hide it. One afternoon, he found her sitting on the couch, her hand on her stomach, breathing slowly. You okay? He asked, hovering near the doorway. She looked up at him and smiled faintly. Just a little back pain. Comes with the territory. He hesitated, then walked over. You want tea or something? She blinked, surprised. Tea would be lovely, actually. Eli went into the kitchen, rummaging until he found the box of herbal tea. He wasn't sure how fancy people liked it, but he figured hot water and the bag would do. When he brought it back, she took it with both hands. Thank you, Eli, she said warmly. He shrugged. You helped me with food and a bed. I can make tea. That night, Clara found herself smiling for no reason. She hadn't realized how much she'd missed simple acts of kindness, both giving and receiving them. Not everyone approved of Eli's presence. One afternoon, a sharply dressed woman came to visit Clara. Eli was passing through the living room when he heard her voice. Clara, are you sure this is wise? Taking in some boy off the street? You don't know anything about him. He saved my life, Laura, Clara replied calmly. I think that says a lot about who he is. It says he saw an opportunity, Laura said bluntly. You're too trusting. Eli didn't hear the rest. He slipped back to his room, his chest tight. He'd heard versions of that before, people assuming the worst. At dinner that night, Clara noticed he was quieter than usual. Something wrong? She asked. He shook his head. No. She set down her fork. Eli, whatever you heard earlier, don't let it get to you. I don't think you're here for anything other than what you've said. He met her eyes, searching for any sign she was just saying it to be nice. But she looked steady and sure. Okay, he said finally. Days turned into weeks. Eli began to relax. He learned where Clara kept the snacks in the kitchen, started helping Victor carry groceries, and even watched a movie with Clara one evening. Though he insisted he wasn't really watching, just sitting in the same room. For Clara, the change was just as real. She found herself looking forward to their short conversations, to hearing his dry little remarks, to knowing there was someone else in the apartment when she came home. She'd once thought her life was complete with just work and success. But now, with Eli there, the apartment didn't feel so empty. It happened on a quiet Thursday night. Eli was in the living room, flipping through channels, when he heard Clara call his name. Her voice was different, tight, urgent. He jumped up and hurried toward her bedroom. She was sitting on the edge of the bed, one hand clutching her stomach, the other gripping the sheets. "Clara? What's wrong?" he asked quickly. She took a deep breath. "I think it's time." Eli froze. Time for what? Then it hit him. "Oh, you mean?" "Yes," she said through a small groan. "The baby's coming." Eli's heart started racing. He'd never been in a situation like this before. Okay. Okay, what do I do? Should I get Victor? Call someone." She nodded, trying to stay calm. "Victor first. Then the hospital." Eli sprinted out of the room and found Victor in the kitchen. "It's happening. The baby's coming." Victor's eyes widened. "Right. Get her bag from the closet. I'll pull the car around." Minutes later, they were in the back seat, speeding toward the hospital. Clara was breathing steadily, though Eli could see the strain in her face. "You're gonna be fine," he said, gripping the seat. "Both of you." Clara managed a faint smile. "Thanks for being here, Eli." He nodded, his throat feeling tight. "I wouldn't be anywhere else." At the hospital, nurses whisked Clara into a delivery room. Eli sat in the waiting area with Victor, his legs bouncing nervously. An hour passed. Then two. Finally, a nurse came out, her expression bright. "It's a girl," she announced. "Both mother and baby are doing well." Eli let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "Can I see her?" The nurse smiled. "She asked for you." When Eli stepped into the room, Clara was lying in bed, looking exhausted but radiant. In her arms was a tiny bundle wrapped in a soft pink blanket. "Eli," she said softly, "meet Sophie." He approached slowly, his eyes wide. "She's small." Clara laughed gently. "They usually are." She tilted Sophie so he could see her face. A tiny nose, closed eyes, and the faintest wisp of dark hair. "She's really cute," Eli said, a little awkwardly. "Do you want to hold her?" Clara asked. He blinked. "Me? Are you sure?" "Very sure." Carefully, she placed Sophie into his arms. Eli stared down at her, feeling something strange in his chest. A mix of protectiveness, awe, and warmth he couldn't quite name. "I'll keep her safe," he said quietly, almost to himself. Clara heard him anyway. Her eyes softened. "I know you will." Over the next few days, Eli visited the hospital daily. He learned how to hold Sophie properly, how to gently rock her when she fussed, and how to make silly faces that sometimes coaxed the smallest twitch of a smile. When they returned home, Eli's role didn't fade. He carried diapers from the nursery, fetched bottles, and stood guard when visitors came, watching them with careful eyes. "You're like her big brother," Clara told him one evening. Eli shrugged, though a small smile tugged at his lips. "Guess I am." But deep down, he knew it was more than that. She wasn't just Clara's baby, she felt like his family, too. Spring came slowly to the city. The air grew warmer, the rain less frequent, and the trees lining the streets began to show the first hints of green. Inside Clara's apartment, life had changed in ways Eli could never have imagined. Mornings began with Sophie's soft cries. Clara would feed her while Eli sat nearby, making faces or telling tiny stories just to see her stop fussing. Evenings ended with quiet moments. Sophie asleep in her crib, Clara reading in the living room, Eli curled up in the armchair with a blanket that was finally warm enough to keep out the chill. One afternoon, Clara asked him to sit with her at the dining table. "I've been thinking a lot about us," she began, her voice steady but warm. "About you, me, and Sophie." Eli frowned slightly. "What about us?" She took a deep breath. "You've been part of this family since the night we met, Eli. You've helped me in ways I can't even explain. You've been a brother to Sophie, and well, you've been like a son to me." He looked down at his hands. "Yeah, but I'm not, officially." Clara smiled. "That's what I want to change." Eli's head shot up. "Wait, you mean?" "Yes," she said gently. "I want to adopt you, if you'll let me." For a moment, Eli didn't speak. The room felt very still, except for the distant hum of the city outside. He thought of the streets, the cold nights, the constant uncertainty. Then he thought of Sophie's tiny smile, Clara's steady kindness, the way this place, their place, felt safe. "You really want me here?" he asked quietly. Clara reached across the table, taking his hand. "More than anything." Eli swallowed hard, his throat tight. "Okay, yeah, I'd like that." The process took a few months, but by summer, it was official. Eli Morgan. He still wasn't used to the sound of it, but it felt right. The day the papers were signed, they celebrated with cake in the kitchen. Clara held Sophie in one arm, cutting slices with the other, while Eli tried to keep the frosting from ending up on the baby's blanket. Later that evening, as the sun set and the city lights flickered on, Eli stood by the window, looking out at the streets below. A year ago, those streets had been his home. Now, they were just part of the view. Clara came up beside him, Sophie asleep in her arms. "Penny, for your thoughts?" He smiled faintly. "Just thinking how different things are. How fast it happened." She rested her free hand on his shoulder. "Sometimes, the smallest moments change everything." Eli nodded slowly. "Yeah, like stopping for someone in the rain." They stood there in comfortable silence, the city stretching out before them. Eli didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing for sure: he wouldn't face it alone. And for the first time in a long time, that was enough. We've come to the end of the story. I hope you enjoyed it. Leave a like and subscribe to my YouTube channel for more interesting stories.